Good evening YouTube, what's cracking off? Asmid here, and today I'm going to bring you another faction guide for the Dark Elves again, but this time we'll be focusing on Malekith's faction, which is Naggarond. Now, as always, this analysis will be taken into consideration 4 different categories, which I'll be rating out of 5. Those categories include faction attributes, the leader martial prowess, the commandability that leader offers, and the faction buffs. As always, this analysis, this guide is based on campaign only, so only applies for Mortal Empires or either Vortex. If you are playing multiplayer, this guide may not necessarily apply. Yet again, I do play on hard, but this guide should hopefully be applicable to you at all difficulty levels, whether you're a newcomer and you want to pick up a few tips, or whether you're a veteran player and you just want to learn how to use the full potential of Malekith's Naggarond. Right, without further ado, let's get started. Starting with the faction attributes then. Okay, let's start off with the starting location. Now, Malekith starts off in Naggarond, which is the province of the Iron Mountains. Now, this can be an okay settlement / province to start off with, but it does get harder down the line, especially with the impending Chaos Invasion. So, previously, the Chaos Invasion always used to start off right in the middle of the ocean here for the New World, whereas nowadays the Chaos Invasion pretty much starts in the northern wastes of Norska, which is around here, both in the New World and the Old World. So there'd be about 2 or 3, well, depending on what difficulty you'd be playing, there'd be about 3 or 4 armies from Dagrak's-End and Ashrak, and then a few more armies for Quark and whatever, this other the Frozen City. So there is a bit of a negative point to Malekith's starting province, just due to the fact that somewhere around between turn 90 to about 110 you all start to experience the full force of chaos, and as you are on the front lines, you do have to be careful for that. Therefore, the starting location for Naggarond is a bit meh. Now, one of the main things that lets Malekith down is his faction effects. Now, the Witch King of Naggaroth, the diplomatic relations penalty with the Exiles of Mahek is irrelevant, because Exiles of Mahek aren't really much of an issue, and the fact that he can increase loyalty for new recruits by +2 is decent. However, the fact that you give a percentage of XP earned to other lords, and if other lords are higher level than Malekith, then they're more likely to rebel or basically leave your army. Because of that fact, I can't justify giving Malekith a high ranking. However, he does come back by boosting diplomatic relations with the Cult of Pleasure by 30, which is again really good, because you do want to confederate Marathi relatively soon as Naggarond. But based on that, I'm having to give Malekith a ranking of 2 out of 5 for faction attributes. I think that's the lowest I've ranked any lord so far, and it's mainly due to the fact of his loyalty mechanic. He kind of does make up for his province being the front line to chaos, because Naggarond is a good province. You can build a lot here in the city of Naggarond, and obviously you got 4 settlements in this province as well. So you can turn it into a bit of a massive economic powerhouse for slaves. However, just be careful of that Chaos Invasion. Moving on to the leader martial prowess then for Malekith. Now, Malekith, I'll start by saying he's a very good fighter. First of all, he's got access to some really good equipment. So he's got access to the Armour of Midnight, which boosts his armour, his melee defense, and his physical resistance. He's got access to the Circlet of Iron, again gives him a little bit more armour and helps him in terms of spellcasting. He's got the Destroyer weapon, which boosts his melee attack and his strength, and it allows him to cause the passive ability of Destroyer every time he's around an enemy. He's also got the Supreme Spell Shield, which again gives him a little bit more resistance in the form of melee defense and magic resistance. Malekith also has the Absolute Power skill tree, which again is It's not that great, but every time he's in battle, he does boost himself and the people around him slightly, giving them extra leadership and melee defense. He's also obviously got the powerful mount, Seraphon, which he unlocks a rank 18, which is one of the best dragons as a mounts in the game. Obviously, you can argue that Star Dragons are better than Black Dragons, but either way, Seraphon is very good. And not only has he got access to the Dark Law of Magic, which is decent, but he's very proficient with it. He has got some abilities here, like Doombolt, Soul Stealer, Blade of Wind. Albeit expensive, they are good spells he can cast. And obviously the fact that he's a hybrid spellcaster and a decent melee fighter on top of a Black Dragon makes him pretty strong. In terms of summarising Malekith's martial prowess, his combination of good equipment, decent law of magic, as you can see here through Blade Wind, good mount through Seraphon, the Black Dragon, and his decent ability to be a good hybrid spellcaster and melee fighter makes him a very proficient leader with martial prowess. So based on that, I'm going to be giving Malekith a ranking of 5 out of 5 for martial prowess. Moving on to leader commandability then. Now this is all about how Malekith boosts his army on the battlefield. Now starting off, he's got a good trait in the form of the Witch King of Naggaroth. Now this trait reduces the upkeep by 50% for the Black Guard of Naggaronds, Dread Spears, Bleak Swords and Dark Shards. Now Dread Spears and Bleak Swords, they're okay. They're all pretty cheap anyway, and I wouldn't recruit too many of them anyway to start off with. But Dark Shards, in my opinion, they're pretty much the core of your army for the Dark Elves in the early game. So the fact that you can get minus 50% upkeep from them, reduction for them straight off the bat makes them pretty impressive. Again, moving on to Black Guard of Naggarond upkeep, they are expensive units. But they are mid to late game units, and by that point the Dark Elves should be filthy rich by that point anyway. So it's a nice to have, but it's not essential. But definitely it's a good trait because it does reduce upkeep for those really important Dark Shards that you should always be recruiting. Malekith also has the Supreme Spell Shield. Now this isn't an overwhelming commandability buff, but it does give the passive ability Supreme Spell Shield, which means all enemies within 40 meters of him have a reduction to their power reserves. The more enemies around him, the higher the number of power reserves will be reducted from them. So that's pretty much all that Malekith offers in terms of commandability. There are options in the War Leader skill tree, so just note here that it is locked, and it's locked because you either choose Tyrant or the War Leader path. Personally I prefer Tyrant because of the faction buffs you get, but I'll move on to that later. If you do prefer the commandability of buffs though to boost your army rather than your whole faction, then I do think that War Leader is the one for you. You get reduced upkeep for all units, you get income from post-battle loot, you get casualty replenishment rates increase, attrition's reduced, and also you get more income from post-battle loot. So I do think it's okay, but it's not. Personally, I would highly recommend going down the Tyrant line. But if you are a massive fan of boosting your army, then maybe War Leaders for you. Based on all that, I think the saving grace for Malekith in the commandability aspect is the fact of he's got a good trait. The reduced upkeep for Dark Shards makes sure that you pretty much got a cheap army earlier on that you can go around destroying most of the factions with. So based on that, I'm going to be giving Malekith a ranking of 3 out of 5 for commandability. Finally, moving on to faction buffs then. Now this is where Malekith absolutely shines. Let's get started then. As I mentioned earlier, Tyrant. Now these are probably some of the best traits or skills that you can get throughout the whole game, let alone the Dark Elves, let alone the Dark Elves. Let's get started with Tyrant then. So first of all, public order all provinces +1, very nice. Tax rate +5% faction wide, very nice. Motivation through fear. Now this is a really powerful one. As I mentioned in my race guide for the Dark Elves, they pretty much thrive on having a very high slave economy and making a ton of money through that. So the fact that you can get motivation through fear to increase your income by 20% for all provinces, reduce the decline rate by 10% all provinces, reduce the public order penalty by 15% all provinces, it's pretty impressive. He's also got seditious or sanguine, if I'm saying that right, sanguine. So this, again, diplomatic relations buff with Dark Elves is very nice because you can get them confederated a bit quicker. It does give a public order +10 in the local province. It's not as good as faction wide, but it can be handy at sometimes. And then there's the untainted +10 as well when in their own region. Then there's the efforts redoubled. Now, this isn't very global, but if you are in a province, you can pretty much boost the tax rate, the growth, the construction cost reduction, and the construction time by considerable amounts. So he's got some very good faction buffs. Now, again, as I mentioned, you can go War Leader, but I don't recommend it. If you do that, then you can get Lord Recruit rank +2 faction-wide, which can be helpful, especially if you want to get those Shadow Dart Lords pretty early. But I always do recommend going down the Tyrant line, because especially motivation through fear, this is a very powerful skill that it pretty much makes, it turns the campaign from a little bit tricksy into pretty easy if you get this skill, especially early on. I always like to rush down the blue line and get Lightning Strike. Courtmaster isn't really necessary because, like I said, the Dark Elves don't have problems with money, but I do like getting Renowned and Feared because of the extra campaign movement range. And the recruit rank +1 for all units. But then that pretty much takes me to rank 12, so I can move straight onto Tyrant. I know some people like to capitalise on the magic skill tree, but at the same time, you do start off with the Fire Wizard as the Dark Elves. So you can just pretty much start putting all your points into Burning Head and Flamestorm and absolutely burn the enemy to crisp, even before Malekith is unlocked Blade Wind or anything like that. So based on that, I'm going to give Malekith a 5 out of 5 for faction buffs. In summary then, Malekith, or as I like to call him, King Edgy, is a pretty decent Lord slash faction. He's a good hybrid fighter. He's got access to the decent lore of magic in the form of Dark, which is pretty good because you can cast some decent spells. It's not the best, but it is pretty good. He's also a good melee fighter on top of Seraphon, which makes him a pretty good hybrid fighter overall. Now, he does offer some absolutely immense faction buffs, as we mentioned earlier. However, he is slightly let down by some of his mechanics, such as the loyalty issue, when lords that are higher loyalty than Malekith will defect a lot quicker and easier. Based on all that, I'm going to give Malekith and his faction Naggarond a ranking of 3.75 out of 5, putting him in the balanced tier. I hope all you guys enjoyed my video. If you did, please leave a like and a comment. If you didn't, again, please leave me a comment explaining why, and I'll try and get back to you. Cheers guys, peace out.